Hi, I'm Aidan from G2G Coaching. So today I want to go over rebuilding a squat pattern. So let's say you've got like an absolutely chronic squat, like it's a complete car crash, and you want to try and rebuild it again. So what we're going to try and do is work up from a body weight squat up to different variations. Like we'll go through a goblet squat, a front squat, back squat, and even a low bar squat, and try and carry them over and help make sense of it. We'll begin with the body weight squat. We're going to go through the setup of it, the stance, feet, what you do with your core position, how you engage your lats and your head position, and then just descent and ascent, so the execution, and then finally cover things that tend to go wrong in the squat, which is the big thing. So I'm going to get Donnie to kind of go through the setup for a body weight squat. Being able to do a body weight squat is pretty important. So there's a lot of people actually who are able to do a very heavy loaded back squat, but actually are unable to do a good body weight squat. They need that kind of loading to be able to get into a good position. Being able to do a good body weight squat's pretty important. So for now, I'm just going to take it that essentially Donnie can do a good squat. There's no issues, and we're just going to go through general setup and then break it down a bit more. So the first thing we'll go through then is just like stance. So these are general kind of ideas to kind of base off of. Most people, when they take their stance for a squat, will have it so that the inside of their feet line up with the outside of their hips. Okay, that is going to vary from person to person, but for the time being, that's what we're going to focus on. Okay, so Donnie's in that position. He's got a wee bit of out-toeing. Okay, so his feet are kind of pointing more like a 5-to-1 position or a 10-to-2 position on a clock. What that'll do is allow his knees to track outwards and help him stay a wee bit more upright when it comes to his squat, so he's not going to have to lean very far forward. So basically, whenever someone does a squat, okay, if you can just do just a couple of reps, ideally you want them to stay relatively upright. So when it comes to a body weight squat, we're looking for the head to stay over the midfoot. Okay, so that's basically your kind of weighted area. It changes when you've got a bar, but initially it's the head over midfoot. And to achieve that, we essentially want them to be as upright as possible and as little forward lean. Okay, so stance width and toe angle is going to contribute to that. Now, the one thing that's going to also make a big difference is range of motion at the hips, but we'll cover that in a second. Okay, so we've gone through foot angle, we've gone through stance, and the next thing is just going to be what that person does with their trunk position or their core position, which is basically their pelvis and the rib cage. Can I get, yep, perfect. There we go. It's like you know what you're doing. So really what we're looking for here is a neutral pelvis and a neutral rib cage position, so you're able to engage the core the whole way around, okay? The opposite of that would be going into an extension pattern, where it's a big, say, anterior tilt of the pelvis, or more, this person is just flared out, in Donnie's case, lengthened through the abdominals. Or the other way, which doesn't happen that much, which is people really tuck their butt under and end up with this kind of like dog taking a crap position, which you never really want to be in. Okay, so neither of those is a particularly fantastic position. There's obviously some variation depending on the load. If it's a loaded squat, you might fall in the abilities if it's heavy enough, but ideally it shouldn't really happen. So that's the kind of ideal core or the core position or trunk position. So neutral pelvis, neutral rib cage. If someone's going to squat, ideally you want to see this maintained the whole way. So if I get Donnie to do another couple of reps, his main thing is trying to maintain that. Look at that as being like the priority when it comes to a squat, okay? Perfect. The next thing that will come after that then will just be trying to engage lats, and we've briefly covered head position, which would be the final thing. So when it comes to lats, in this case, there's a couple of different ways to help someone engage their lats. They can keep their hands where Donnie is and just think about engaging their lats and pulling their shoulders away from their ears, or hands out in front, sometimes that works, and try and engage the lats from there. You're trying to combine all those aspects together, keep that head over the midfoot and perform that squat. Okay, so just try those things together. And that's ideally the perfect way to execute your squat, okay? In terms of talking about the descent into the squat, once you've got those kind of areas ticked, we're looking for a pretty even break at the knees and the hips, okay? Coming to certain other variations, like a front squat or a low bar squat, there'll be a slight more preference towards knees or hips, but for a body weight and a back squat, we're really talking about even break at the knees and hips together. So if you're able to do that now, perfect. Just go one more rep. Okay, so that's essentially what we're looking for. Okay, when we're talking about the descent, breaking at the knees and hips evenly, trying to stay as upright as you can. And then for the ascent, basically coming back up, but focusing on trying to finish with full hip extension, so squeezing your glutes at the top and keeping a good core position is sort of the focus there. Good. Ascent is basically where you're trying to drive from, or what you're trying to, move through. So knees and hips, and ascent is what you're using the power back up. In the case of a squat, it's very much quads and glutes sort of working together. You'll get a wee bit of involvement in other areas like hamstrings, but main drivers, quads and glutes. So that's your kind of like ideal setup for a body weight squat, and has a carryover to the rest of the squat patterns. What we'll basically do from here is then kind of cover the things that will generally go wrong in a squat, and then try and work out essentially what it is that's kind of going on. Right, so next thing we're gonna cover is things that go wrong in the squat, or usual things that you see, and try and figure out why exactly it occurs. So if you're, say, assessing your own squat or trying to figure out what's going wrong for you, that you can kind of come to the right answer, and that it doesn't really, I don't know, you end up getting led in the wrong direction, which can happen quite a lot. So the first thing I would start with, and what we tend to start with at GTG, is what happens at the trunk and the core position first off, okay? Because it tends to affect a lot of things. So what Donnie did earlier on was he did a squat where he, or a setup where he went into a big excessive arch through his lower back. So if you can do that and then just do your squat. That's a really common thing that you'll see, is this big excessive amount of extension through the lower back when someone squats, okay? So going from here, it's just looking at, one, is there a lack of control through the trunk and through the core, or is there just a lack of awareness? So when you're standing with someone, like, can they actually achieve a neutral pelvis or ribcage position? They can, and let's say you get them, or you get yourself to try and maintain that and just squat, if you can go for it, and they can, that's fine. It's just an awareness aspect. The next thing is, if it wasn't the case and they couldn't hold that, one, they could be just so used to the other pattern, they find it hard, or you find it hard to get out of, or else it's the case of they're just really weak through there. A really simple way of testing that would be trying to do a plank or do a dead bug. We've got videos on dead bugs, and just seeing what the control is like from there. Just to give you an idea of that, Donnie, if you can lie down, we'll go through a dead bug briefly. This is a pretty good one because you've got the floor for feedback. So if you can just lift your feet up, try and engage your core, get a neutral position between between pelvis and rib cage, and then just extend your leg out one side and then out to the other. And the idea here is looking to see, can they control that position, or does the lower back lift and they extend? That would be one way of saying, right, this is maybe something we need to focus on. You can jump back up, man, that's perfect. So start there, that's a starting point. If there's no control there, I wouldn't bother really with the rest of it, that's pretty important. The next thing that would then tend to come would be what happens with the feet and the stance. So let's say you follow that perfect setup and you have the person and you're like, great, you know, feet are in that ideal position, feet are looking good, and they squat and their feet collapse in and their knees buckle in as they come back up, okay? So that's a really common one, especially when someone gets loaded, right? So what is it that we're really kind of looking at here? Like, what's the main issue? One, it could simply be a case of it is a core control problem, and then they're trying to get more leverage through their lower body here, through the legs, let the knees buckle in. But if you've assessed the core and that's not a problem, and that seems to be fine on yourself or someone you're working with, then I'd be looking at, well, what's kind of going on at the hips? Is there enough range of motion at the hips and enough control? And maybe is their stance not correct, or is there something else leading to it? So that's when we use maybe like an assessment on a table, or you could try this yourself to sort of try and assess yourself on, you know, lying on your back. Ideally, you try and get someone else to do it, but that might not always be the case. So on a few other videos, I did this before. We talked about squat stance, another video, and did this sort of similar thing with Donnie, just to sort of show what's going on. But basically, if you could straighten out both legs, what you'd be kind of looking for here is to see when you test what way your hips move, all right, like a hip scar, it's called, where's the greatest amount of depth that you get? So you bring the leg up, you move it to the side, and find out where do you get the best depth here? Where does the knee come up the highest without having to compensate like crazy through your lower back? To give you an idea of like what's maybe the preferred position for you to be in squatting. For Donnie, he's about there. The next thing is you just check and see what's the external rotation of the hip like versus the internal rotation of the hip, okay? And what's the balance? If there's a lot of external rotation there, you're probably gonna see the person wanna take maybe a wider stance or turn their toes out more, okay? They really prefer a position where the thigh is angled out the way, So basically turned that away there, okay? Where if there's a lot more internal rotation, you'll probably find it's a closer stance and the feet are more angled forward. Something to be really aware of when you're assessing this on yourself or else maybe somebody else is whether or not they're keeping a neutral core position or they've got their core engaged, because you can get a false reading by someone who doesn't have their core engaged. They're very relaxed here and actually maybe they have awful core control, and so around the hips there's a lot of stiffness because maybe the hip flexors are overactive. So you go to test this and it's just stiff and you're getting nothing out of it, and you think, well, actually you don't have a lot of external rotation, so your squat should look like this. It's a false reading, so it's just something to be very, very aware of. So we test that on both sides and then sort of gain a picture of what it's looking like. So you know that that person maybe has really good range of motion and they maybe have a nice balance between internal and external rotation. So you're looking for like a fairly medium stance, and that's kind of what we're aiming for. If you find out that it is maybe very extreme in one direction or the other, a lot of external rotation, not a lot of internal, or vice versa, that might be what you're looking at as to whether those knees collapse in. If it's neither and all seems fine and the person's knees are still collapsing in at the bottom of the squat, then maybe you need to look at range of motion at the ankle. Okay, I'll get you to jump up. So what's a pretty common thing is people using a heel lift in a squat are actually lacking range of motion at the ankle. And this is something that's pretty important to test, okay? And you'll see this in a few ways, which is one, the knees collapse that we just saw, or else, I'll get you to jump forward a wee bit. When they go to squat, they really sit back, like really sit back, and they don't challenge that. So it's best to test and see then if this is ever presented, either a collapse or a real back shift, whether it's an actual range of motion problem at the ankle. So I'll get Donnie to do a knee to wall test. So basically up to the wall, take your feet away from it, make sure your hips are square, and then without shifting your hips, can you push that knee over your foot and get it to touch the wall, okay? There's measurements for this. Ideally, you're looking for anywhere between sort of 2 to 3 inches for that knee to track over and forward of the foot. And then you're probably fine until that heel begins to lift. Again, this is gonna vary with leverages and things like that, but for Donnie, it's probably not too bad. In this case, it's maybe a wee bit of stiffness, but he's pretty good range of motion at his ankles. You probably don't need to be too concerned about it. Good to check left to right, because a lot of the times there's gonna be a difference. Okay, so if we rule that one out, then you would look for the next thing. If you test this and you find there is stiffness at that ankle joint, then you maybe go for a heel lift. So you get somebody to elevate their heels. In this case, we'll just use the ramp. So you're essentially taking that foot and you're putting it into plantar flexion and give it a wee bit more range and get them to squat and see what happens. Does it clear it up? Yeah. Or do you do it yourself and it clears up? Yeah, then you're good to go. If you test it on the wall and there's no issue there whatsoever and it's still presenting in terms of feet are collapsing, then maybe you're finding something up at the hips, or else if they're sitting really far back into that squat, you've probably got a core position, and again, you want to go back and test that. Okay, so really then, like I say, start with the trunk position, the core position, because that usually tells you a lot of stuff. If there's no real issue from there, you can kind of move out. You know, maybe move down towards the feet and see what's happening. If they collapse in, is there an issue at the hips in terms of range of motion? Is there an issue at the ankle because due to range of motion? If not, then you're probably looking at just an aspect of weakness there, and that's it. So test range of motion or stability there first off, and if it's fine, check just general strength. The next thing we're going to do is then move up the chain. So we've got the core in place and go on to lats. So essentially your lats almost work like the abdominals of your back in a lot of ways, in terms of they'll really create a lot of stability through the upper back when someone's squatting, and it comes very, very true in a back squat. So if you put your just hands out in front of you. So ideally what we want to see is some depression of the shoulders to get the lats engaged, okay? So that when the person squats, and more so in a loaded position, that when they squat down, they're pretty rigid. That's it, and then all they can really do is move through that ankle, knee and hip. That's all the option is. They can't find compensation anywhere else because this is completely rigid. Core is on, lats are engaged, okay? What you might then find instead is someone who's unable to keep a good core position is they set their lats, they're really strong, and it pulls them in the extension. This happens, okay? So now you're in that big extension pattern, they go to squat and here, a lot of pressure here, a lot of times depth becomes a problem, and then now his knees are collapsing in because he's kind of running out of room in his hips due to the fact the way he's tilted his pelvis. Or the other one is there's no tension through the lats, and the person squats and they just tuck their butt under at the bottom and they kind of lose tension here altogether. That's the next thing that would happen to pay attention to. Okay, so that would be the lats. So you're testing that one. All it is basically is checking to see, can someone engage their lats? Can you engage your lats without losing that core position? And then basically when it comes to the position of the head, and the final thing is basically going to be head position. There's not a ton that can really massively go wrong here. It's one of those ones that probably begin to focus on towards the end because there's usually a lot more stuff. But if someone does a very forward head posture and they kind of shift their head over their front of their body, over their center of gravity, everything else is going to follow forward. And you're probably going to see some compensations in terms of a big forward lean or that person just shifting their weight onto the balls of their feet. And again, this person could be you. So that's what you're kind of looking for in terms of the usual big things that can go wrong. Something else that's really worth talking about, which is a wee bit more in depth, is shifting from one side to the other. So what we'll kind of look at is if I get, yeah, that's fine. If I get Donnie to stand here, what people will usually do as you stand around, you're waiting for a bus, you're waiting for someone, is you'll tend to have a preferred stance, okay? People tend to stand on one leg, shift into one side, and it causes basically your ability to move into that hip. You prefer that side, okay? There's more range, there's more control. So he's moved into his right side. So whenever Donnie squats, he's probably going to prefer that pattern, okay? So when he goes to squat, you'll usually see a shift off to one side. And this is very obvious in a squat. You'll see the hip come up and hike up, and you usually see the opposite side drop. What I would do in this scenario is first off, just test, is there a difference in terms of range? So again, if you can jump onto the table for me. You'll really look at this one and you'll see there's a difference from left to right hand side. So you'll check internal rotation and external. So you go from here to one side, and usually you'll find less internal rotation at one hip than the other, and less external rotation in one hip than the other. So the side that has more internal usually has less external, and the side that has more external usually has less internal, okay? And 9 times out of 10, the side that has more internal is the side that they stand on more. So let's say in this instance, I test Donnie, and then the right side, more internal rotation than the left side, and he goes to squat, okay? Get you to jump back up again. You will usually see a shift then into that favored side, okay? And if you load that, more and more problems can kind of come up. So that's something to be aware of. It's just, is there a lack of range of motion at the hip that could be like a difference from one side to the other that could be causing this? And if not, is there just a general kind of issue when it comes to strength? Now, most of that can be helped and corrected by just focusing on pelvis position and core. Usually you won't hip shift without compromising the core first off anyway. So if you can focus on that, it'll allow you to get more of an even squat. So that's the basics of the bodyweight squat. What we'll do now is move on to the other variations and go on to goblet squat and just talk about how these things can differ and what you need to look out for whenever you're squatting. Cool? Happy squatting. Done. Right.